I know the last film that you directed was Wallace and Gromit, the Were-Rabbit. Can you just tell us a little bit about, obviously, this is a completely new property, so you sort of started from scratch. At what point you started to think about the next project and how it sort of developed?
Yeah, I mean, most of these ideas, they start with doodles, in sketchbooks. It's the way we, guess a lot of creative people work. Any big idea starts with very small doodles, and with Chicken Run, I just remember sketching a chicken digging its way out of a chicken coop, and then there it was. It's the Great Escape with Chickens, and same with this. It was I was just doodling, your typical caveman and caveman with a club sort of thing, and then thinking, what about a baseball or a rounder's bat, and then the whole idea of sport and the whole tribalism and behind football, and thought, what if a bunch of lunkhead cavemen were to not able to use their fists and their clubs anymore, but had to learn a game, and that's how the whole thing started to spiral.
And is there a kind of a pressure on you in terms of when you've made a number of Wallace and Gromit sort of short films and then the feature, and so those are characters you're very comfortable with and you know how they behave. I don't doubt that they're difficult to make, but when you're doing something from scratch, is there that kind of pressure of what the next thing from Nick Parker is going to be?
I guess yes, because I don't know what, because I'm me, I don't know what people's expectations are, so probably one of the most nerve-wracking things is how to. It's the first 10 minutes of the film. Really, is how to. Some of the credits are still running.
They're still going.
I'm still reading those. It's how to establish, like you say, there's no familiarity when you're creating a whole new world and whole new characters. And I know it's the same at Pixar or Disney or DreamWorks that. They regard the first 10 minutes as the most important part of the entire film, and most work goes into that area of the film because it's trying to establish and connect with the audience within the first 10 minutes.
And at some of the studios, like Pixar, you talked about, they have a thing called a brains trust where a number of the the directors and writers kind of get together and they look at the work in different at different points during the process. And you've now got, obviously, from Shaun the Sheep, Mark Burton and Richard Starzak, and obviously you've got Peter Lord and Dave Sproxton. Is there a kind of equivalent at Aardman? Do you have a group of people like that who are kind of creatives and will give you feedback during the process?
Yeah, we've had it for a while where we all are many creatives within the company and outside writers, and we get together very regularly. And since we started doing feature films, we learned very quickly that it takes quite a while to develop every idea. I mean, this one was 2 or 3 years in development, something like that. That's
just purely in the process before you even start doing one model, one whatever. It's just developing the character and the story.
Testing the idea, really, as basic as that, and pitching the idea to your colleagues, getting lots of feedback, and sitting in having coffee for many moons.
A lot of coffee.
Yeah. And kicking ideas around, seeing if the idea has legs, really. And so we're trying to get better at that, because there used to be, when we did Chicken Run, and then we weren't quite ready for the next feature. So a lot of the people we'd worked with or trained had to go elsewhere and until the next feature came up. And now we've got more of a turnover. We're straight into Shaun the Sheep 2 right now.
So some people have gone from Early Man straight into Shaun the Sheep?
That's right, yeah. So we're trying to keep a continuous employment going. Yeah.
And we just saw on the screen there the little nod to Ray Harryhausen and having the dinosaurs Ray and Harry.
Yes.
I mean, how important was he? Obviously, he was one of the great stop motion animators. He used to animate, for those who did, these sort of creatures in a lot of the sort of films like Jason and the Argonauts and Clash of the Titans and Million Years BC.
Yes.
And he was obviously an inspiration for you.
Yeah, well, A Million Years BC, at the age of 11, I was this massive dinosaur fanatic, and then I couldn't believe it when A Million Years BC came on the TV in about 1971, I think it was. 72, and I just could not believe I was seeing dinosaurs moving. And it was that film that made me pick up a home movie camera and start making my own films.
And I think Ray was a great friend to the BFI and used to come and visit here a lot, and talked a lot about like when he made Clash of the Titans and he had hand animated everything himself, and then later on obviously there was sort of CGI kind of takes over.
Yeah.
But actually, and it's the same with your work, you can tell the kind of love that goes into those characters. They're not the sort of shiny CGI, beautifully polished. You know, they've got a lot of character in them from that kind of way of doing stop motion.
Yes, I always, I mean, we at Aardman we do have forays into CG and we do a lot of CG commercials and so on. But I'm at heart myself, I'm a clay man, you know, I'm a plasticine man myself, and I just like, I mean, I think a lot of the time we tend to believe it's all about story, whatever the technique is, and it's all about story and character. I think that's true on the one hand, but for me, the clay has a humour in itself and a quality. Just doing it, I mean, like Gromit was born out of plasticine. I don't know if Gromit would have, I'm sure, you know, great admiration of Pixar and DreamWorks and many CG films, but I'm sure they would have arrived at something, but it wouldn't. It's the fact that the animator has a clay figure in front of them and they're handling the puppet every single frame, and it somehow imbues you can do all those little human nuances that Gromit has, for example.
And when the film was being made, and you've got lots of little individual sort of studios within the studio, and lots of different animators are working on different bits of the film at any one time. I mean, do you have a rough idea how much kind of what we see on film they could do, like in a week or a day or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, on this one, on our features generally, on this one particularly, it varies slightly. I was working with about 35 to 40 animators all the time, and that means we're shooting on 35 or 40 sets. We have a studio on the outskirts of Bristol where we do our features, Estate West, and it's like a warehouse about the size of a football pitch. And it's divided into loads and loads of, like 30 or 40 different sets. Some of them, some of them are the size of this desk. Others are, like a small cave scene, or others are giant landscapes, almost the size of this room.
What were the biggest sets that you had to produce?
We had massive ones actually, and we did do a mixture of CG. We couldn't fit skies in, so we did green screen. A lot of green screen work and a lot of compositing afterwards, where we, all the principal kind of character animation was done using stop frame puppets. But we did
for things like obviously when you've got crowds like in the football stadium, a lot of that is CG, is it?
The crowds particularly. We did a lot of close-ups of the crowd using puppets, and I just love the thumbprints and as you were saying, the quality that it. I don't mind the hair. A lot of stop frame animators would really steer clear of hair and fur because it got this thing they call boiling or the twitching, because the animator handles the puppet a lot. But I like that as part of the quality. But sometimes, as you were saying about the sets, for example, the football pitch was just so big. It was the football, because the puppets were about this big. The football pitch was like the length of this stage, which the animator couldn't even reach on to reach the puppet. So any of the players that were in the background out of focus were quite often produced digitally. And the background, the crowd, definitely digital. Yeah.
I mean, you just touched on then about the fact that the models, how big they are, and so forth. I mean, you have some of the stars of the film with you now, don't you?
Oh yes, yes.
Are you prepared to?
Time?
I think it might be time for maybe you just share them with us, if that's all right.
Okay.
And then you get an idea of what the sort of sizes and so forth.
These are the actual puppets from the movie. This is Doug. This is the scale we would work to. Shall I put him at the front here? On the stage, and here's the sidekick.
This is Hognob.
Hognob. That's Hognob.
Turns out to be a great goalie.
We do have a couple more here. We have Guna. She was on Graham Norton last week.
Oh, was she? She had a rider actually to be here today. You had to provide her with Smarties and things.
And we also have Lord Nooth. Tom Hiddleston. I haven't got Tom Hiddleston here, but
we've got better than Tom Hiddleston.
Probably
We've
would
got
have preferred that. But we've got the puppet of Lord Nooth. There he is.
Wow. Should we pop him over here next to? Oh yeah, okay, that's fine, isn't it? Beautiful. I mean, they are works of art in their own right, aren't they? I mean, they really are beautiful.
Yes, and we have an amazing team of people, because so many, as is true of the whole film, so many different talents and disciplines are involved in from the metal armatures inside them, ball and socket armatures, so they can keep their pose.
So it's still that same traditional style that actually Ray Harryhausen would have adopted like decades ago. It's exactly the same principle, really.
It's the same principle, same technique. Yeah. Stop frame, moving them a bit, taking a frame, moving them a bit. The only difference is now we shoot on digital cameras rather than on film, which gives us a lot more flexibility afterwards.
And obviously, all of these characters have voices attached to them. At what point do you know who is going to voice the character, or do you do the casting? Is it at the very start, or do you do some of the animation first, and then, or are they working with you throughout the process?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. It's quite a fluid process. From the very beginning, while we're writing, we work with Mark Burton mainly on the script, and we'd be sat there, and I'd be sketching, and I like to have quite a hand on the design of the character myself, so the whole film has a sort of signature. But as soon as I've done a sketch, I might even make a model, a quick model, but we have a whole team of model makers, and we might mock the whole thing up in plasticine, and then we then cast the, we have idea, go to Eddie Redmayne, whoever, ask him to do some testing, and then we try animating the mock-up of Doug to that, see if it works, see if it feels natural.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because some of the people who you have voicing the characters are not portraying the kind of roles that we would necessarily expect them to portray, particularly in terms of Eddie Redmayne or Tom Hiddleston.
Yes.
And so you have to kind of obviously think about them into that. I mean, how does that work in terms of, you say to them, this is the role and this is the kind of person, and they come up with the voice, or do you work with them on that?
And I think at the time as well, with Eddie and with Tom, I'd only had a drawing, I think, to show them. But then the second time we'd record each of them about 8 or 10 times throughout the whole film, because the script kept changing and we kept going back. But then the next time I'd show them a model, and then we'd try, even before we'd even recorded or done a test with them, even before that, we would go to another film that they'd done. That's the beauty of YouTube. You can find a clip, and then you can animate the puppet to that clip from another character, or you find a character that's maybe similar, in a similar territory. With Eddie, he made a film called Black Death about a novice monk in the Middle Ages, and I was looking for a sort of slightly dishevelled sound, and I love the way he's so vulnerable, and he can easily sound sort of dishevelled, and he just said, "How old is he?" And I said, "About 15," and he just suddenly went, "Oh, I went a little bit like this, Hognob," and I just felt he was very good, and the way he spoke and actually curved his mouth the way he was talking, that made us alter the puppet so that Doug always has that slightly sort of turned up mouth.
Do they come back at various points and record dialogue, or they do all in one go? And are they together, or are they separate?
Yeah, I mean, because we need the dialogue before we can animate the puppet, so that the animator can do accurate lip sync. But we do go back. I like to work with them one at a time. I'm not used to handling real people. It's all right with clay, you can squish it, but if it doesn't behave. But yeah, but I work with one at a time, and often it's the script. We haven't got we know the whole arc of the story, but we're working in sections of the script, and then we get to a certain point and think, oh, actually, Act 1 is all a bit wrong now, so we go back. Can we re-record that? And, yeah, there's a story that Maisie has, that she did a first recording with us, and then we went back for a second, and she had a brace fitted, and she sounded completely different, and so we had to. We asked her she volunteered to take the brace out to re-record more dialogue, and that sounded like much
commitment
better.
To her art.
Yeah.
And you talk about, obviously you've got Eddie Redmayne and Maisie and Tom, but actually the actor who you chose to be Hognob is probably the one who kind of who beats them all. How did he come about?
Yeah, it was accidental in a way, in that we for months before filming we put together a storyboards and story reel, and we put a very rough, like, temporary soundtrack, and the crew, the editor, the different members of the crew do voices just to see how the scenes are shaping up, and I was doing Hognob all the time, so and then.
And how does Hognob sound? I'm putting you right on the spot there. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if I can do it in front of but I tended to think of Scooby-Doo like a more primitive, like, not quite the, not quite that, but just that. So I've been accused of being like Yoda.
Talk about putting you on the spot to do that. Sorry. And one of the things that some of the other sort of studios do as they're making a film is they kind of add on what they kind of call Easter eggs. And there are some companies like sort of Pixar who have like the Pizza Planet truck or the room. Is there anything like that Aardman has? And are there things that as you're going along, all the little kind of gags that kind of appear? I mean, are they things that you would look after, or do the animators just put? Because there's lots of things in there, aren't there?
There are. I don't know if I can think of. We have. There are. I mean, actually, I didn't realise, but the animators have snuck in Wallace and Gromit into one scene, and I didn't. I was just watching it one day, and we just happened to stop on a certain frame, and there is Wallace and Gromit.
Is that something that we would have seen, or
they're
is
in
that
the crowd somewhere?
Oh,
yeah. And I didn't even know they'd done it.
And presumably part of the fun when you're doing this is sinking yourself into the sort of Stone Age and Bronze Age. Is all those little sort of gags like posters in the background or things that might be?
Yeah, we have a lot of fun with that. It happens right from the beginning, right when we're script writing, because the puns are like the easiest jokes to come up with, often very painful. And the model makers put them in, and set dressers, have loads. Story artists all put stuff in, and we choose which. There are some that never get into the film as well. Like there was a poster meant to be in the marketplace in the bronze world, which was sorry, that's not going to be worth it in the end. But it was Find Love Carbon Dating. That was I wish you put it in there. It'll be on the DVD.
And when you think back to I know the script must have gone through many, many different stages, but when you think about the original idea and the original sort of first script that you did, how much of it do you reckon resembles what we've seen on screen now?
Gosh, I know, because I imagine it doesn't seem like we've been through a million versions, but it's you just rewrite the whole thing probably at least 100 times. That I would have said. I'm not sure how much kind of. It's just all evolves in a way, so it's kind of hard to track what. You really.
But
do.
the fundamentals are there, are they? Would you say?
Oh yeah, the fundamentals are there. It was always going to be. It's. When I first used to pitch the idea in the studio, it was it's about cavemen, and they invent football, and cavemen playing sport for. It's early Man United. That was the pitch, but then that was like a bit too complicated, and the studio our backers were nervous that it would seem like just a football movie, and then it would seem like just a Man United. It would like Marmite. People either love or hate Man United, so it would, split the audience.
I think we have some time for some questions. What I'd just like to do first of all is see whether any of the kids in the audience would like to ask a question.
I think it's. I'm always just looking for ideas that make me feel excited and want, because animation is such a long, arduous, very long, long haul thing to do. You've got to be really excited by the idea, and it was this. I'd never been, never got involved with cavemen and women before. Or with the Stone Age, and that seemed very exciting. A new world and new characters, that's what excites me.
You do a lot of research on sort of cave people and so forth.
I did.
I don't know what research there is really, but did you do what research there is?
It's an exciting thing to actually do all the research and read all the books and everything. Not that there's that much historical or scientific
not many autobiographies
accuracy.
You can kind of dip into.
Gosh, well, my first proper one, if you like, was I started the first Wallace and Gromit film. I was at film school. I was a student at National Film and TV School, and that was a student project. But then Aardman took me on and offered to help me finish it at Aardman in Bristol. So that was
and that one is a Grand Day Out.
Sorry, a Grand Day Out. Yes, a Grand Day Out. Wallace and Gromit Grand Day Out. But I was. making films since I was about 11 or 12 years old at home, just as a hobby. And strangely enough, one of my first, probably it was about film number 3 I did on Super 8, standard 8mm on a Bell & Howell camera, was about a caveman and his pet brontosaurus. It was called Murphy and Bongo, and this little caveman that had a pet brontosaurus.
You know, all these years later.
Yeah.
Holy man.
I shot the whole thing out of focus. So. Oh gosh, I have many memories of him, and he was. Again, I was at the National Film and TV School. We were given 50 quid to pay actors back then, which was a lot for a student. And I only ever had Peter in mind to play Wallace, and he said yes I think it was a favour to a student, really. He didn't know what it was or what it was about, and he came to the film school. He was always a very lovely guy, always very funny. Even off mic, he was very funny.
And despite his huge body of work, actually, that ended up being one of the roles he's most remembered for, isn't it?
Yeah, which is an honour, because I'd only seen him in Last of the Summer Wine, and that was popular back in the 70s and much later. But yeah, I think there probably were many. In a way, what may seem like a fairly simple kind of storyline was quite a difficult one to figure out, really. Went through many hurdles. Part of there were different ones, really, because there was a kind of I think what we discovered, there was not just a clash of civilizations. There was a clash of genre. There was on the one hand the big action, epic adventure, plus there was the underdog sports movie, which are quite separate story models, and matching those two together. Plus we had the guys that, it was part of a running joke, really, underneath the whole idea, was the guys that invented football could then not much later on never win the game of football, and that was kind of a funny sort of parallel to how things are for some. But yeah, it's in a way the hardest task throughout the whole thing, apart from technical aspects of the animation, is making a story that is compelling and with characters that are compelling for 80, 90 minutes. Well, yes, because the puppets, they look like they're speaking, but they've all got actors. There are actors who we go and record with a microphone like this.
And will the actors see what's going on the screen in front of them, or have they just got a sheet of dialogue they're working from? Or?
At the beginning, they've just got the script, or we may show them a model or a drawing of who they're going to be. But then later on we show them a model, and then as the animation starts to develop, we start to show them whole scenes, and so they get a strong idea of who they are then. I have no idea. 25 frames per second for... I don't know what the length is.
In terms of the actual... You talked about the 2 to 3 years of pre-production, but when you actually start filming, how long did it take from beginning of the filming to finishing the filming?
It was all our features about the same, about 18 months for the actual animation to be done.
About 35 to 40 animators, over 18 months. Yes. You have to do the maths yourself, but it's a lot, I would say.
That's right. And each animator is doing about 2 or 3 seconds a day. So if we get a minute done in a week, that's really good going.
Wow.
Well, I guess you have to have people working for you who do that, who keep cracking the whip, basically. Producers and floor production managers and what have you. And they all organise the schedules. It's like the war rooms, It's like people shifting what scenes we shoot, because we're shooting every scene at the same time. That's what gets tricky. If you suddenly have a rewrite on a scene, you think, oh, that scene's not quite funny enough, or the character arc doesn't quite work. So it gets a massive, problem. With all the main characters, we'd be shooting on different scenes with that character. So there may be, I don't know the exact figures as to how many of each, but I'd guess we had probably about 10 of each made for the film, because they're filming simultaneously. They do sometimes I once found Wallace's head squashed on the floor with a big footprint in it once.
That's a grisly story.
But they do get bashed, and we have like a pit stop that the models go away. The model makers the heads are made of clay, but they're all different materials really. So they look like the clay. The originals were clay, but then we make moulds of the limbs and the legs and make them out of silicon or latex so that they can be easily replaced and stand a lot of wear and tear.
Oh, that's a good one.
My favourite ever, from anywhere or just our own.
What about one that you've done and one that from elsewhere?
Oh, right. Yeah, okay. Well,
Not to put you on the spot.
I grew up, I love, Peter Lord and David Sproxton, before I joined, I used to watch Morph on the television, on Tony Hart's programme. That was always my favourite. And
is it right that when you go to work at Aardman, they ask you to make a morph as part of the process? Is
I don't know if that's a formality, but I know a lot of people here make a morph. Yeah, as soon as you walk in the door.
Who's an accountant? You've still got to go make a morph.
I know when I started, it's like the first job I got was to... Well, when I first started, Pete was doing more. Pete Lord it was his baby really, and no one was allowed to. And he slowly, got confidence in me to handle more. And
that's when you know you've made it, when you get to handle more.
Yeah, but now people walk in the door and they're doing more. It's like, I can't say Hognob, can I?
Can?
I haven't. I don't know. I mean, I like. Because I've been so involved with creating them all, you have to love them in order for them to be on the screen. And even the villains, you have to love them. You have to love to hate them. So yeah, I do like Lord Nooth. I like them all. I can't decide, but I like Dug and Hognob. I'll go for that. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, because you may know that he started off in a close shave. That who's this little victim really in the Wallace and Gromit film, A Close Shave, and it's funny because we suddenly found in that year 96, 97, Sean suddenly overtook Gromit's in terms of merchandise. Oh. And it was partly because the Spice Girls were photographed wearing a Shaun the Sheep backpack. Anyway, that's an aside really. And then, it was years later, we were just thinking of series ideas, and it struck me, that Sean could... I gave it quite a lot of thought, and then I pitched it, maybe Sean could get his own series. And then Richard Starzak, who was our head of children's script development then, he took it on his shoulders to develop the whole world. And he's really taken my character, made him a bit older, and he's invented all these other bits and the farmer and the other sheep, and created them around Shaun the Sheep. Well, all the main character stuff is all the main character work and foreground work is all stop frame animation with these puppets. How much? I don't know what percentage is, because you've got the crowd, which takes up quite a high percentage of the animation. So that's probably the best way to look at it. In the football game, anyone in the background out of focus was digital or CG. There was a lot of CGI effects as well, like the lava, volcanoes, smoke, fire, things that are hard to do in plasticine, really. Gosh, yeah, well, that goes back a while to my film school and college days, again, really. It was a film school project. I think I had this idea about a guy. I was thinking of what is going to be my graduation film going to be, and I had this idea about a guy who builds a rocket, and the joke was he builds it in his basement of his house, and it all went from there really. And then I thought he needs a sidekick, someone to speak to, and that's how Gromit formed. It sort of evolved really, and that was a grand day out. Yeah.
Thanks.
And I mean, presumably the cheese industry must owe you a bit of a debt of gratitude.
Yeah.
Because I mean, certainly, sort of Wensleydale and Stinking Bishop as well.
Oh, yeah, well, that was another story actually. Yeah, but yes, it's great to have such power over cheese, cheese companies.
Things you never knew when you went into the industry, the power over cheese that you would have.
Yes, I mean the Wensleydale people, they did tell I mean, I know it's a traditional cheese, much older than Wallace and Gromit, but the company was going bust at the time, and 4 of the staff were buying the company, and they did tell me that the sales rocketed after Wallace said the line, "Not even Wensleydale," in her show. And it became a more international brand.
So when the inevitable knighthood comes, it's going to be for cheese services as much as it's for puppet animation as well. Yeah. A huge thank you to Studio Canal and Asa in particular, who's been responsible for making this event happen, and to our friends at Aardman Animation. A massive thanks to Nick Parr. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.